If you're actively seeking ways to build your mental toughness, navigate life transitions with grace, or simply find inspiration to keep moving forward, then you're in the right place. Welcome to the Art of Beautiful Thinking podcast.
Hello and welcome to the Art of Beautiful Thinking. I'm Kat with my co-host Yvette. Today we thought we might discuss the pretty big topic, I suppose, of domestic violence. Coming at it from the position of being both lived experience survivors of childhood domestic violence in our homes, and myself also with a background of working with domestic violence offenders and having a really interesting insight on how it looks from the other side.
Yeah, it's a pretty touchy subject, domestic violence, and I think there's two aspects to it. This is really part of our relationship series as well.
Yep.
And it's not just about the relationship series that you have with your partner. It's also the other aspect of the relationship you have with yourself when you come out of that type of environment and what it does for you in the long term, especially when you've been a child that's raised in it, and how it affects your life when you leave that. And it affects your life in ways that you wouldn't even realise.
Yeah, no concept until you get there and go, why is this happening?
Yeah. Why is this playing out? Yeah.
Mm.
Why do I have such self-doubt or a lack of belief in myself or things like that? And it usually all stems from the childhood trauma.
Yeah, why does this man who likes to control and coerce me feel like home?
Yeah, exactly. Things like that. Yeah.
Mm.
So I think the first part that we probably will touch on a little bit is, well, what is domestic violence? It comes in lots of different shapes and forms. I think originally one of the things that was quite prominent, that when people thought of domestic violence, was the physicality of domestic violence, and it does come, as we said, in lots of different shapes and sizes. So did you want to add into some of those? Yeah.
I see a worrying trend, and I see it still very much alive, that intimate partner violence these days, people still think intimate partner violence literally means that a partner has laid a hand on the other partner in some way that is violent. Intimate partner violence is so much more than that. There's a huge spectrum of it comes down to, I mean, there's this fantastic like visual that I used to use when I was working with offenders, and that was called the Duluth wheel. And it's just got the most amazing, split intersections, and explains really clearly all the different aspects of domestic violence, which goes right from financial control. If a man, or I'm going to say men a lot of the time, I'm not being sexist, it's just that all the data shows that for the most part, usually it's men that do perpetrate domestic violence. Although in saying that, I've never seen a domestic violence relationship where both parties weren't engaged in really quite bad behaviour. Yeah. It's usually, what usually happens is there's that chaotic, angry relationship which goes back and forth with lots of coercion and control, jealousy, trying to establish dominance, psychological, mental, emotional abuse, all kinds of things that go backwards and forwards. So it's almost like you're locked in this ugly dance of torturing one another, and both people want to stay there. There's a lot of codependence you see in these relationships where both parties want to continue, and they're engaged in the cycle of abuse. So it's you see a lot of that, but usually the man snaps and goes to the point where what we see a lot is the male has gone to the point where he just can't cope anymore, and he usually hits the woman or does something. That's why I would see them, because they would end up, being involved.
That's how you've gotten there. Yeah. As the other end of actually being a probation officer and dealing with them from that perspective.
Yeah, that's right. And it's so good that the laws have changed. So the laws have changed. We have brought in across every state, I think, coercion and control laws, which is, and not all domestic violence relationships have physical violence in them.
No.
Interestingly. But all domestic violence relationships show some sort of financial control usually. And when I say financial control, I'm not meaning if you and your husband or your partner sat down and you're trying to save for a house or trying to save for something, and your partner said, look, you've got to pull back on spending, we've got to get a budget together and a plan, or complains that, you're spending too much money. That's not coercion and control. what is controlling is when your partner blocks your bank account or is constantly having a go at you. I know my ex-husband, I went out once and bought the girls, I spent $200, I think, at Kmart one winter for underwear and warm things and stockings and what have you for the girls. And then I bought a couple of extra bits and bobs, like maybe some Barbie movies or something. And he went nuts and said, "Why did you spend all that money? You spent $200." And I was like, "Yeah." He's like, "What were you spending all that on?" And I said, "Why do you care? I run my own business and I earn my own money. I earn plenty of money. If I want to spend $200 on my kids, I will." But that's an example of trying to be controlling. He would always try and make us feel like we were poor, we couldn't spend any money, and would question absolutely every single transaction and whinge at me constantly. And then would be, "Why can't we make that at home? Why do you have to buy that?" When it
Yeah.
becomes a burden where you're constantly feeling questioned, nitpicked, and it's becoming something that makes you feel anxious because you're going, "Oh God, I'm doing the wrong thing." Then you got to ask yourself, is this coercive and controlling behavior that's designed to make me feel like I've got to obey?
Yeah. So the feeling of like you're walking on eggshells all the time.
Yes, if you're walking on eggshells all the time, if you're not feeling equal, if the other interesting thing that happens is if one partner is raising their voice all the time, slamming their hand against the wall, throwing things, smashing their hand or you're terrified to go, "Hang on, I don't like the way you talk to me." If you're scared to raise that with your intimate partner, there's something really wrong.
Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah. Totally. And that's the thing. I think there's some of the red flags, and if you can pick up on those early,
Yep.
it's a lot better to recognize it and go, okay, it could just be a moment and have a
Yep.
conversation about it, and that could end it because that person may not even be aware that they're actually behaving in that way.
Yeah.
If you see that it is consistent behavior, then you do want to kind of go ask yourself the question, do you really want to stay in that environment?
Yeah.
Because
That's
it's not
right.
going to be healthy for you. And especially if you're looking at this person potentially being a lifelong partner
Yeah.
and that you're looking at bringing kids into it, etc.
We have a
Um,
terrible culture in Australia where we traditionally, one woman dies at the hands of her intimate partner on average every week in Australia. And it's sort of part of what we do. This is, and we do have that subculture of, "Oh, well, she's a bitch and she deserved it." We hear that a lot. You get a lot of um I know certainly from the perspective of domestic violence offenders, they always see themselves as the victim.
yeah,
Isn't that
yeah.
interesting?
I mean, it's fascinating when I look at what I grew up with, and I was obviously a child born into domestic violence, and by the time I came into the picture, being the youngest, it was already in full swing,
Yeah.
and had been in full swing for a number of years. Now, would I look at my father and say that he looked at himself as the victim? I never saw that from him, behaving in a victim manner.
Mhm.
Did see that of my mum. Um, and, yes, he was very physically violent, and it happened when he
Mm.
got drunk.
Yeah.
When he wasn't drunk, he was a very nice individual. The
Yeah.
problem was he wasn't like that very often. But then when I look at my mother, and that realization didn't come until I started to understand more. My mum was actually emotionally
Yeah.
violent, um, and not just to my father, but also to us kids. And my father was also physically violent, not just to my mother, but also to us kids. So we got
Mm.
it from both ends. And was it a mechanism with my mum of protecting herself, like that she became verbally abusive? Who knows?
Mm.
But that's all I saw.
Yeah.
And I would have thought when my father passed away and my mum had the opportunity for a new life, even though
Mm.
she would have been hurt and wounded and things like
Yep.
that she would have moved on with a new way of life, like, okay, this is a new opportunity and I no
Yeah.
longer need to have this emotional, like that verbal abuse going on. And
Yeah.
I no longer require that pattern, and I'll get help.
Yeah.
And that was when I realized that my mother was also an abuser because she didn't do anything
Yeah.
to rectify the situation. And in fact, she probably got worse as she
Wow.
got older. Was some of that due to the fact that she was traumatized? Most likely.
Probably. probably. Yeah.
but she had multiple opportunities to actually do something better for herself. Like,
Yeah.
whether it is to go off and get counseling, whether it is to do any of those things. But
Yeah.
she chose not to do that. She chose to keep drinking and to keep
Yeah.
being verbally abusive. Um,
Mm.
and again, when alcohol wasn't involved, she was less verbally abusive, but she could still be quite cutting with her
Yeah.
words. And
Yep.
so that's the other thing. Sometimes the violence doesn't come, just as we said, from the physicality, but
Mm.
words themselves, when said
Yeah.
in certain ways, can be
Yeah.
just as bad as being punched in the gut. So
That's right.
how many times has someone said something to you that has just it literally has felt like you've been punched? That's how bad
Mm.
verbal abuse is.
Well, I think it's worse when it comes from your mother, honestly. I think that, there's Tennyson said, "Mother is the word for God on the lips and
Mm.
hearts of all little children," and he was spot on. And it's a really hard, I think in our age group, it's a really hard thing because we were raised to respect our parents,
Mm.
honor thy mother and father. I remember hearing that at church when I was a
Yeah,
kid.
yeah, yeah, multiple
Um,
times. Yes.
but the truth of the matter is that sometimes these people that are our parents are not actually very good candidates for parenthood. They're
No.
not able to. They don't have the capacity to grow for whatever reason that is, whatever that might be, or they simply choose not to engage in looking at themselves or having any kind of self awareness, or they're just so pre-contemplative, as we call it, that they just can't see what they're doing wrong. They just lack the
Mm.
capacity to look at themselves. I mean, a lot of the times they might admit in a moment of weakness, yes, I know I'm not doing the right thing. I've not been a good parent, but the fear factor of actually confronting what's going on within themselves is just too much, and they
Yeah.
won't.
Well, I can remember a couple of times with my dad, because he would black out when he drank,
Wow. That's, yeah,
and he wouldn't remember that he
yeah,
was violent.
mm,
And when that was brought to his attention, he was devastated. It's
yeah,
like, "Oh
yeah,
my god, I did what?"
yeah.
But he didn't stop drinking.
No, didn't do
And so,
anything.
the drinking kept happening, and that meant
Yeah,
the violence kept happening, and then it just got to a point where very rarely was he not drunk, you know?
yeah, it's really awful,
So,
isn't it? I mean,
it's a
watching.
interesting, yeah, so you're watching this and you're
Mm,
watching it unfold, you're also, as a child, looking at it from a perspective, and the reason why I'm probably going down this path is because if you are in an environment that's like that, and
yep.
you've got children or you're thinking about children, the
Yes.
impact that this has on kids is
Huge,
extremely detrimental. I mean,
huge.
there's so much research. You're talking about throughout someone's formative years that
Yep.
this is what they're seeing. They're seeing
Yeah,
trauma straight off the bat.
growing them up
And
in a pressure cooker. Mm.
exactly.
Yep,
And
yep,
they're either going to continue that cycle themselves
yep,
as they get older because they know
yep.
no better, because they've not been shown anybody, they haven't had great role models or anything like that.
Yeah,
Or they're going to make a really clear decision that they're going to have a very different life to that.
and
But yet
probably nothing to do with the parents.
they'll still come out of it being,
Mm.
basically wounded on some level, having
Yeah,
some
very
form of
wounded.
pain and suffering that's happening on
Mm.
some level and trying to sort that out. And if they've got any form of self-awareness, they'll start doing some work on themselves.
And they may not have any contact with their parents either. It's
Yeah.
extremely common with these sorts of situations where grown-up children will, well, the place where all this stuff plays out, all of this childhood abuse plays out is in your intimate partner relationships. That's where
Mhm.
all the stuff, because I think you and I were talking about it, how, as you move up and change in life and different events happen, you unpeel those layers like an onion. And if you've got this stuff from your childhood, it shows up in the space where you start reliving and questioning, not even consciously, you
No.
know, with your partner and having these relationships. And then suddenly your partner's like, why are you doing that? That's not cool. You're like, oh, why am I doing that? Yeah,
Yeah.
and this is where it all
Yeah.
comes out. So domestic violence. The other thing I have seen a lot of as well is children of domestic violence, and I speak particularly to female children of domestic violence, associate the drama and the jealousy and the cycle of abuse with the emotional build-up and the high-pitched, chaotic relationship as a proper relationship. They
Mm,
think it's normal and they
mm,
don't understand. So when they try to, and it's not even that they think it's normal, it just feels normal to their nervous system. So when they try to get into a relationship with a guy who's kind and gentle and wants to talk things through and has really good boundaries and is very not abusive, for them it doesn't tick their boxes and they feel like he doesn't love them enough. I've
Mm.
seen that too. Whereas the cycle of abuse, and I'll talk about what that cycle of abuse is. It's really interesting. So when you're saying that your dad was a really nice guy when you didn't drink. So you see that a lot with people that are self-medicating with alcohol for whatever reason. Probably our parents were really not into going and getting therapy.
Oh, there was no such thing, I don't think, of therapy back then. Therapy was, drinking. That
Yeah,
was
that's right.
therapy.
Get shit-faced, be
You didn't
silently
you didn't
ashamed.
talk. I mean, we've mentioned this before, back in those days, you didn't talk about what went on behind closed doors
No.
in the family home,
No,
just
because if you did that, you were a disloyal little shitbag and you
mm,
you know, you weren't loyal to the family. And that was the whole keep your mouth shut. The silence bred more abuse, which was really bad. And I think our generation are still we're still looking at that and we're seeing all of I know for me, I'm looking around like at the Me Too movement and all of these changes in coercion and control laws and making sure that, people are not discriminated against. For the most part, I think it's absolutely fantastic that we're doing
yeah,
this.
yeah,
People are
absolutely.
getting a voice. People
Mm,
are getting a voice, which is awesome.
mm,
But anyway, so yeah, the cycle of abuse, you start with your normal sort of relationship, things are going along quite well. And then that person might start drinking, or there's something that triggers them at work, or there's some unresolved stuff that's going on with them. Then they start drinking. Things keep going and going and going. It might be a build up for weeks, and you can
mm,
feel the tension beginning in the household, and you can feel like the abuser is becoming more and more uptight, more and more snappy, and then suddenly there's a massive blow up, whatever that might look like. Then the person who is being abused, the survivor, is wanting to leave or move on, but is also terrified of moving on because, we all know the statistics say that the time when, particularly women who are in these abusive relationships, are normally at most risk is when they leave because a lot of these guys are really codependent and they don't want you to go.
yeah, yeah,
So, and then what the abuser will then do is if they realize they're at risk of losing their partner or they suddenly feel guilty, they'll love bomb them and be really amazing and be that person they first fell in love with for, however long that might be. And cycles of abuse can be different lengths of time, but it might even be 6 weeks that they're just the most amazing person until the tension starts to build again and around we go. And so the person who is being abused keeps getting glimpses of the lovely person they fell in love with, and they're like, but I really love him. Deep down inside, he's a good person, but he's going to continue abusing because these cycles don't break without intervention. They usually
yeah.
just get worse.
Well, yeah, yeah. I mean, in my case, my dad committed suicide, and he tried to take my mum with him. So that it was, and luckily enough, none of my siblings were home. We were all old enough at that point and had moved out of home when it happened.
Yeah.
And it was funny because as a teenager, I used to always say that my father's either going to kill himself or kill someone else.
Oh, yeah, you're right.
Because that was pretty evident to me, like the way that
Yes.
he was behaving. So it was no surprise when I got the phone call from mum of what had happened, and she was obviously totally traumatized by that as
Yeah,
well, and that
yeah,
that really fucked her over.
yeah,
But it's, again, when you're talking about that cycle, and as a child in that, and growing as to all of my formative years, even till I moved out of home, that was still going on. I was 19
yeah,
when dad passed away. And then you kind of have this, oh, okay, well, that's over
yeah,
because we believe that the main perpetrator had
yeah. That's the
had
story
gone.
you were given.
Yeah. And then finding out, well, he was only part of the perpetrator.
Yeah,
He
he
was only
was he was
partly
one
that.
half of the.
Yeah, one half of it. And it's fascinating when you're talking about how does that come out in when you are having your first serious relationship yourself as a child coming out
Yeah,
of environment. And I know the first guy I moved in with and moved overseas with, he was fine when we were in Australia together, and as soon as we moved to his home country,
yeah.
he started behaving differently and becoming
Mm.
controlling, and occasionally he would get physical, like
Ah,
push me
okay.
around, not punching or stuff,
Yeah,
but he'd push me around. And I remember the first time it happened, I was gobsmacked, and that was the thing, I was totally stunned by it
yeah,
because I was someone who had made a decision that I would not have a life like my parents had. I would never have
yeah,
a life
yeah,
like my
yeah.
parents had. And because I was in another country, I had no one else that I could rely on except for
You
him and
were
his sister.
isolated.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's another trick of
And
Jesus is
I
to
so I
isolate.
immediately contacted my mother
Yep.
and kind of went, "This is what's happened." And her advice to me was, and this hit me like a ton of bricks. Her advice to me was,
Oh.
um, "This is normal. Forgive him tomorrow. You'll forgive him tomorrow. It'll all be okay. You don't need to come back home."
Oh, fuck. That is the worst advice I've ever heard in
Exactly,
that
exactly.
situation.
When my brother found out, he went off his nuts and he said, "You gotta bring it back home." Um,
Jesus.
but but mum went, "Oh, no, 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 it's all fine now, and it's all settled down." But that was the first, that hit me like a ton of bricks. Like, I
Yeah,
was shocked, and then I kinda went, "Okay, well, I'm on my own. I'm totally on my own.
that's
What can I
terrible.
do here?" And then things got better,
Yeah,
they did get better. And then he started occasionally he would come out with this, and then it became more frequent, and then I just got to a point where I went, "No, this is not the life that I want. I do not wish to have a life like my parents," because I could see that. I could see that if I
yeah,
stayed in that relationship, it would pretty much turn into exactly the
yeah.
relationship my parents had. And I
Even
went,
though you
There's
consciously
more for
did
me."
not want that. You
Yeah.
consciously said, "I don't want that." So what you looked for was someone who was completely not like that, or so you thought. And it's really interesting. Was he very charming and the man of your dreams at the outset and couldn't be more attentive and wonderful?
No, not really.
He wasn't.
I'm just trying to go back. I mean, good-looking guy, that type of stuff. He was intelligent. But was he the man of my dreams? I don't know. I obviously fell in love with him such a long time ago. But yeah, I don't. I think I probably knew that I was never going to spend the rest of my life with him.
Yeah, right. But was he sort of like super charming and amazing when you first met him? Because I know
Oh,
that when
lovely. Yeah,
yeah,
everybody
really
loved him. Everybody
yeah,
thought he
yeah,
was
yeah, yeah, very charming.
yeah,
Yeah, yeah,
yeah,
yeah. And then interesting that he isolated you and then the mask started to slip. It's interesting, isn't it? It really
yeah,
is.
yeah,
Yeah, and that's the other thing, relationships that are abusive, there's a bit of a playbook. Initially very charming, initially just the most amazing person because you're just like, "Oh, wow, I can't believe
yeah,
the mental and emotional intimate connection I've got with this person," because quite possibly they're love bombing you. They might have, figured you out and decided
yeah.
that they know how to press your buttons really well. And then, yeah, when the mask starts to slip, I mean, I always say, tell them no early on for something they really want and see how they react.
Well, the fascinating thing was he was with me in the first few months we were together that we met each other was when my dad actually passed away.
Oh, so he was really
So,
supportive.
so he knew about
Mm,
the environment that I came from. He's very clear.
okay.
Yeah.
Because you're very honest and upfront too. You're not one of these people that tries to manipulate or whatever. So,
No,
and
not at
I'm similar. So that can be a bit of a danger for people like us too, because we can sometimes be sitting ducks for manipulators and bullshitters
yeah.
because we're
Yeah.
pretty much
And they take
open.
advantage of it. Yeah.
Mm,
So
yeah,
but the interesting thing was the acknowledgement of realizing that I did not want to stay in that. And
yeah.
I was in that relationship for probably 2.5 years, something like that, and then kind of went, no, move.
What do you
And
think was the thing that made you just go, I'm not doing this? What do you think gave you the courage to just go, this is not happening?
well, that's a story in itself. But at the end of the day, we were at a someone's party, and
Oh,
I was socializing with people. Happened to be having a conversation with a guy there who was an ex-boyfriend of a friend of mine. Who had just come back from overseas, and I was actually really interested in his overseas trip. Not interested in him. I was having a conversation with
yeah,
him about his overseas trip.
yeah,
Uh, my partner at the time kept coming up to me going, "Oh, come on, let's go, let's go." And it's like, it was still really early. And I was going, "Okay,
yeah.
yep, 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 I just want to finish this conversation." And then finally, when we did finish the conversation and I left and we hopped in the car, he basically, on the way to the car, he started yelling at me. And it was pure jealousy of like, you were trying to get on with that guy and all that, which was not the case at all. Um, and when I hopped in the car, he pushed my head against the window, like really hit it quite hard against the
Shit,
window.
shit.
So I was in a car that was moving. I couldn't do anything. Couldn't hit
Oh,
him. And I wasn't going to hit him, but I was like, but I did look at him and go, "Don't touch me again." Um, then when we got home, I just went into a totally different room of the house, went away from him. And the next morning, I waited to the next morning, didn't speak to him. I waited to the next morning and basically said to him, "It's over. This
yeah.
is this is never happening again."
And how did
Um,
he react? How did he react when you said that?
he was shocked. He was apologetic. Um, he also, like, I still had to stay there for about a month whilst I was saving up money to be able to come back to
Mm.
Australia.
Yep.
And he, during that period of time, he came to me, and I remember because I was in the bathtub, he came to me and basically said, I don't want you to leave. Really, I do want you to stay. You mean a lot to me. Mind you, he was someone who could never use the love word. He could never say that he loved me. But he
Okay.
said, but how about, if we were to have a child together, would you stay? And I was gobsmacked by that. I kind of
I'm
went,
sorry, but
you know, why would I bring a child into this? This is ridiculous.
that's
Um,
fucking the stupidest shit I've ever heard.
and but it was, the fact that I had to stay there for that month, I just had to keep using my willpower. And even though I was fearful I didn't know what I was going to come back to when I came back to Australia,
Yeah.
it was literally having to start over again.
Mm.
I left him with everything that we'd purchased. I didn't take anything with me except for
Yeah.
clothes, and then came back and literally, had to start all over again. And I think the pain of that, you also feel a little bit of how did I attract that when I came out
Yes.
of a
Yes.
childhood that was
Yeah.
like that? Why didn't I pick that up earlier
Yeah.
on?
You blame yourself.
And and you do, even for someone who has come from that and raised in it, and then
Yeah.
moving into that relationship. As I said, the first 12 months we were in Australia, so I never saw any of that. He was quite fine, but as soon as we
Yeah.
moved overseas, it was a different story. And that, that was, if anything, that was probably the hard thing to reconcile, was
In
how did
yourself,
I
yeah.
not pick up on
Yeah.
that earlier on? Because I never would have actually gone
No.
overseas with him if I knew.
No, of course not. Of course not. And can I just speak to that quickly? Because if there's viewers that are watching and listening along with this, and there's a lot of people out there who are in domestic violence relationships and they're not saying anything about it because they're fearful and they're scared and they blame themselves. Why did I choose this? You didn't. They chose to behave that way. When I went to university and studied criminology, I was absolutely astounded. We did a paper on domestic violence, and the whole research thing was, why is it that you can have kids or men who've come from um, horrible domestic violence families and they've grown up to never touch a hair or be
Yeah.
coercive or controlling, and why is it that you've got guys from perfectly normal, happy, healthy families who've decided to become domestic violence offenders? There's
And
no
it's funny
rhyme
you
or
say that,
reason.
because that's exactly what he was like. He came from a very loving childhood.
Yep.
And his parents were still totally in love with each other,
Yep.
and they loved all of their kids.
Yeah.
And so I found that was astounding. And then if I look at my husband was also raised
Yeah.
in domestic violence, and he
Yeah.
would
Sure.
he would never
Would
lay a
not touch
hand
his head. No. 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 No.
on me,
Not
and he would
easy.
never be, emotionally abusive or anything like that. Quite the opposite.
Yeah. No.
So
He is.
it is fascinating to see that. Yeah.
It's a choice. Ultimately, domestic violence is a choice. If you choose to use functional violence, coercion and control, and, intimidation or domineering tactics inside your relationship, you are an emotionally lazy person who is choosing to use that to just get control. You're not really a person who loves that person. You're just wanting to own
Yeah, you're
the
wanting to
human
own them. Yeah.
relationship with. And
Yeah.
that is the fault of the perpetrator, 100%.
Yeah.
That's nothing to do with you falling in love or us falling in love with the wolf in sheep's clothing. So it's got
Well,
no.
and I agree, but as I said at the time, it was how did I not see it?
Oh,
Um,
sure.
as I
Sure.
said, because I came from that environment as a child,
Yeah.
and you would think that, my little, I suppose,
Antenna.
radar would have been on looking for it.
I beat myself up for a lot of years because I was the same. I came from a horrendously violent childhood. My mother was married 5 times. My stepfather was a Vietnam War veteran. He had machetes. He used to get around with a machete, had a bloody helmet on the wall from the Beirut War or something, because he was in Vietnam and Beirut, that had literally a bullet hole straight through it. So he would have had to have washed the brains out before he stuck it on his barroom wall. Right next to that was a set of rosary beads. I mean, fuck me. The guy used to drink and drink and drink like he was just textbook, completely messed up, wouldn't have anything to do with getting his PTSD sorted, nothing.
Yeah.
Would get completely shit-faced drunk. Like, I remember once we drove home from his work where he was a manager because he picked me up after school. Or I met him at where he worked, and he drove me home, and I think it was a 40-minute drive. And in 40 minutes, he smashed 6 heavy stubbies on the way home because we lived out country Queensland. So there were no poppers on dirt roads. And then he'd come home and just get absolutely wankered. And then just that would be it. Go into one, just start drinking and screaming and yelling and
Yeah.
threatening us with guns, the whole bit, beat the
Yeah.
shit out of us. It was horrendous. So I know where you're coming from. And my mum always used to say, but when he was sober, he was lovely.
Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, it's really important. And I think the other thing to know is domestic violence does manifest itself slowly. It's like the frog in the cold water that you turn the heat up slowly. So if the person is going to choose, and it'll be little tests. Did you notice that? Little tests of your boundaries as time went by and see what they can get away
Well,
with?
yes, definitely.
Mm,
Definitely.
mm.
Yeah. And I think if I see the very first instance, there was an instance in Australia, but it wasn't. He wasn't. There was no physicality in it, but there was a bit of emotional abuse, I suppose. And yeah, and that was within the first probably 6 months of being together,
Yep.
and it was over something quite trivial, really trivial.
Yeah. And if they
Um,
think they can use their temper with you and really blow up about things, and then
yeah,
you go, hang on a second, I don't want you to talk to me like that. And they
yeah,
just agree and they don't give a shit.
yeah,
That's a big problem. That's a huge problem. You know, like I know whenever my husband has gotten cranky or irritated, I'm just like, who do you think you're talking to?
yeah, yeah,
Like,
yeah.
"Oh, all right then.
Or Jeff and I will call each other out if we're
Yeah,
behaving in certain ways,
same,
and it's like, hello, and we will
same.
both stand our ground as well because we are both very strong individuals.
Yeah.
Um, but to move on from the environment itself and look at, well, what are some of the tools?
How did you do it? That's right. Yeah. How and
How do
that's our lived
how do you move
experience. Yep.
forward? And that's why I think I'm such an advocate for personal growth,
Yeah.
because
Same.
doing all of the personal growth work is what has helped me heal those wounds
Yep.
and go through forgiveness as well. Now, I know some people go, well, how the fuck can you forgive someone that has basically, traumatized you
Yeah.
throughout your life? And it's not necessarily about forgiving the situation. It's about being
Mm.
able to let go and move on.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And
Yeah.
that to me is the whole process of forgiveness, is to,
Yeah.
how could you put it? It's about releasing its hold on you.
Yes, not allowing that scenario to continue playing in your mind, and you let go of the doubts, and you
Exactly.
let go of the bullshit, and you go, "That's yours. I'm not keeping that."
Exactly. And so it's really working on that. And that's quite a big process to do. And
It
it
is.
takes quite a bit of
Mm.
courage to do that too. And the
Yep.
other element is to recognize that you are wounded
Yeah,
and you need
and
to
you need to
heal.
heal.
Yeah.
Yep.
And going through the things that you need to do in order to heal, and that it's okay. It's also okay that you're hurting. It's
Yeah,
okay
it's
that
normal.
you've been in pain,
Yep.
but you don't need to wear it like a badge.
Yeah, and you don't
Uh,
need to live in that space anymore
no,
because you
that's
will
right.
continue to attract that stuff on an energetic level until you
If you're
heal that
staying in
wound.
that, yeah, if you're in that,
Because
if you're in that vibrational
yeah,
space, absolutely.
because
Yeah.
it will switch your central nervous system on, and this will feel
Yes.
like home. It will feel
Yes.
like home for you, and it's not. And I've seen that a lot too. I've seen a lot of offenders that were very violent move on with a lot of women who were also, I've had a lot of female offenders as well who also
Yeah.
committed DV.
Mm.
And they would bounce from one awful relationship to the next, because they hadn't healed that wound. They didn't stop to heal that wound. So it is good to turn around and say, my perpetrator committed abuse against me and that was wrong. But I also need to have a look at myself and go, okay, what do I need to heal within me so that I'm no longer their flavor? They won't be attracted to me anymore. I won't be falling into their trap so much because I'm too strong. Because true offenders, like abusers, they don't really want women who are strong and who are
No,
grounded and who feel
no.
good about themselves, who are, whole inside, because you're really difficult to groom.
Yeah.
Really, really hard work. You
Yeah,
know, they want women who've got unhealed, unresolved wounds and issues that would like
exactly.
to make them their whole life's purpose. And then they
Yeah.
can break you and make you and groom you and make you, grovel down to them and become their victim. And that's a
Yeah.
process.
It is a process. And I think when you recognize that you want to break that pattern with inside of yourself, and it's not to say that you may become a perpetrator, you may, some people do who come from that environment become perpetrators themselves. But it's also knowing that because of your hurt,
Yep,
you have no right to hurt another person
that's right.
because that's where you're coming from. And and I also looked at it and when if I want to have a healthy relationship moving forward, if I want to even have a healthy relationship with myself moving forward,
Yep,
then I need to heal these wounds.
yep,
And that's where personal growth really came in for me. And part of that, like I'm talking about the forgiveness, and part of that forgiveness approach was to be able to understand what my perpetrator's own weaknesses were.
yeah.
And in that, I was able to be, I suppose, a bit compassionate and go, I can see
Yeah,
where
that's
they
a
were
really good
coming
one.
from, and I can understand their behavior. It doesn't mean that it was,
Mm, mm.
no, it's okay to behave that way, but I can see where it's coming from.
Oh,
And
so
when
for
you,
example, like for my stepdad who has now died, he passed away. Um, he was a Vietnam War veteran, an alcoholic, was in Beirut, refused to do any work on himself around that stuff and just used alcohol to, minimize his pain, had several marriages, and then couldn't cope with his own emotions, couldn't cope with his PTSD and his anxiety. So he medicated with
yeah,
booze, then
yeah,
became very violent and took all of his stuff out on us. And
correct.
so I understand intellectually why he did that and looking at it from that kind of
Yeah,
practitioner perspective. But there's still a part of me, and we've done this. We know that your number one strength is forgiveness because you're amazing at it, and it's my last strength
yeah,
on the list of strength. So,
yes.
so you're like the Zen Earth Mother
The
who's
sin of
mm,
forgiveness.
I forgive,
I love it.
and I'm the evil witch who goes, "I'll stick your name in a fucking jar."
But then
Anyway,
you have bravery, yeah, so
I
the
do have
bravery
bravery.
to be
Yeah,
able
I
to
do
get
have
up
bravery.
and
It's a big
go,
one.
I'm not gonna tolerate this, I'm walking away from it. And for me, it's the forgiveness process isn't to be able to just go, "Oh, I'm forgiving you," and that justifies your actions. It's not about
Yeah,
justifying their actions. It's about being able to, as I said, allow it to let go of its hold that it has
yeah,
on me as
yeah,
an individual or on you as an individual, and to be able to then move on. So it's a chapter in your life that is
yeah,
over. And that's how I like to look at it. I look at, all different aspects of my life over the years as different chapters in my life.
yeah.
And in my formative years, that happened to be one chapter. And then there
Yeah,
was a
that's a really good way to look at it.
very small period of time in my early 20s where I had a similar sort of experience that
Yep,
I learnt,
yep,
and I closed that chapter. I went, I don't need to revisit that again. I don't need to reread it.
yep.
I can just, it's like when you're reading a book, unless it's a really freaking good book, you don't go back and reread
Don't
it.
go
You
back
don't go
and
back
read it
and
again.
reread the chapter after you've
Mm,
read the
mm,
chapter. You've read the chapter and you close it and you move to the next chapter. And so
yep.
that's how I look at it. It's like, that's a chapter that's over. What is it that I want to create as my next chapter?
And that's
Well,
exactly my mindset too. Yes, that's
yeah,
what saved me in the past going, "Well, I didn't like that.
yes,
That's not working." And that's what we've said before. The blueprint that we've inherited from our parents is to engage in this stuff. And you can't always know, okay, well, what am I meant to do then? And then you've got to reinvent that wheel so that it
correct.
suits you.
Yeah. And create it the way that you want to create it. Now, if that requires some healing and all that type of stuff, then go do that. Go seek the professional help or do the work on yourself or whatever it takes
Let it
to
suit.
move past that so you don't carry those wounds with you. And
I still carry anger though, I've got to say. For me, the hardest thing to shake is anger at the injustice
mm,
because I look at someone who would beat the shit out of a child on a
mm,
regular basis, like my stepdad did, mother and child, knock us around, belt us, all kinds of things, and terrify us. Like once I can remember, he literally came up behind me and belted me on the back of the head, on the side of the head so hard that he knocked me down and I smacked my head on the ground and I passed out.
mm,
And I was 13. Who does this to a kid?
well,
So for me, I know the guy's dead, but I will always, there's always some part of me that will, and I know that he was unwell and I know that he was all the other things. There's some part of me that looks at him and goes, oh, fuck you.
well, absolutely. And I
Mm.
don't say that I don't have that either. I
Mm.
do. The difference is I won't allow it to control me.
Doesn't control me, but I can't shake, like,
Yeah,
people,
you've
I
got to
think,
acknowledge it. You've got to acknowledge
yeah,
the fact that
can't get
they're
rid of that.
yeah,
I'll always think, "Oh, you fucking ass." You know what I
yeah,
mean?
yeah.
And think, I despise you because even though you had all that shit going on, you didn't take one step to make a change in your life. And then the children are the ones that have to suffer, or the
It's
people around you
correct.
have to suffer. Mm.
And it's interesting because I think also, and we've spoken about this before, as you get to a certain age, and like we're both in our 50s,
Mm.
you do tend to reflect back on life, and you will reflect back on certain chapters of your
Yeah.
life. And I can honestly say that if I look back at my childhood, I do have
Mm.
times where I get a bit of sadness come up, or a
Yeah,
bit of
definitely.
because I go, if only things were different, we could have had a very different life.
Yeah.
And I also, look at my mother and think, you could have done more as well. Could she? I don't know, but that's how I feel.
Yeah.
And I cannot deny those feelings. And that's the
No.
thing, it's not to deny them and not
Yep.
to push them down, but to actually acknowledge them and
Yep.
realize that it's okay to have that pain. It's okay to have that hurt. And for you, it comes out in anger.
Yeah.
So, and that's, that's okay to have it, just as long as you don't push that onto other people.
Yeah, that's right. You don't
Yeah.
let it flare up. And it reduces over time all the time
It,
because,
it does. It
and,
does.
when I
And that
found
just
out that he
means
died, I was like, whatever.
yeah, and that just means that there's a bit more work for you to do in that space,
Yeah.
and I think like I was talking to you about it this morning, how some things have been resurfacing for me, and I've had to go, well, okay, let's reflect on this, and really recognizing that I'm still carrying some pain there, which I thought I'd already dealt with, but evidently not. So
I
there's,
know.
and it goes back to when we were talking about peeling back the onion layer. When you're doing that work on yourself,
Yeah.
you're peeling back one piece of onion layer, and then you do some more work, and you're peeling back that other
Does
piece of
the
layer.
onion ever end? I don't think the
Well,
onion ever ends.
possibly not, possibly not. And I think, I'm coming down to some of the core stuff. And so some stuff that's been seated in there for such a long time is coming up to the surface.
Mm.
And you're looking at it going, well, okay, I've got to sit with this
Yeah.
and recognize it.
Mm.
And then also one of the things that I decided to do was to visualize the wound.
Ah,
Like
that's interesting.
where is the wound in me, and visualize it. And I sort of saw it as cracks
Yeah, yeah.
in like an energy field type of thing, and I just saw these cracks. And I thought of the Japanese art of when something falls apart, when something breaks and you put it back
Yeah.
together with this beautiful gold glue, and then it looks like a totally different piece
Yeah,
of
it looks
artwork all
amazing.
of a sudden. It looks amazing.
Yeah.
And so that's what I started visualizing myself, was gluing those cracks, or the wounds, with like a gold glue.
I love
And
that.
that gold glue was like a healing, just kind of healing it and bringing it together and bringing, I suppose, visualizing peace
Mm.
and a bit of just healing thoughts, whatever. And that kind of helped to settle,
Yeah.
because it was like, I'm not going to push back that feeling. I'm going to recognize that these feelings are there, that there's still some pain there, there's still some hurt there. I still have a little bit of suffering happening.
Yeah.
So to release the burden of that suffering, what can I do?
And that's, I love that. I love that metaphor because you're still that same cup.
Mm,
You've acknowledged that there's cracks there, and you're
yes,
healing them with even better things, with even more precious things, and that makes that cup even more beautiful. It makes it even more
exactly.
individual, and that's mastery, isn't it? You're not going, I'm going to deny it, I'm going to shove it down, and because that's the pathway to going, oh, I'll just have a few drinks. That's the
Yes,
pathway to that. You're
it
going,
is.
no, I'm going to deal with it. I'm going to acknowledge my feelings, and I'm going to accept that. And that's
Mm,
a totally different approach. And it doesn't sound like much, but it's actually really powerful.
it is. And it was fascinating after doing that bit of exercise, how much release I kind of felt for it. It was almost like it no longer had a hold on me.
Yeah. Not taking
Yeah.
up not renting
Yeah.
space in your head any
And I
longer.
could see it for what it was
Mm.
and acknowledge it for what it is.
Yep.
Then just let it go.
Because when
It's
that
like,
happens, those voices that still talk to us that we don't wanna hear, that monkey mind, that monkey chatter, that's made up of a lot of those negative
mm,
experiences and, people in our lives who perhaps weren't very kind to us when we were younger, and even
yeah,
as we're older,
yeah,
and they might have held positions of importance in our life, such as family members.
Yeah,
Um,
or even colleagues, bosses, that type of thing. And
yeah,
and I can look at it and kind of go, well, if I look at different areas of my life, for instance, where has the wounds and the pain that I took on as a child continued to play out? And part of that
mm,
is self-doubt, or
yep.
we talk about imposter syndrome,
Oh
we're like
god,
imposter
yeah,
syndrome, and imposter syndrome is related. Like a lot of people who have been through trauma as children,
mm,
suffer from imposter syndrome as they get older because they were always told that they weren't good enough. They were always shown that they weren't loved. Like, especially even if someone has told you that they love you, but they're still physically violent to you, there's a
yeah. It
it
tears it tears
clashed. Uh,
that fabric of security in your mind
exactly.
because you know that this person is supposed to love you, and they may love you in many ways. They're not meant to hurt you, and it
Yeah.
really rips into your mind and gives you that cognitive dissonance. It's
Exactly,
horrible.
and your home is meant to be your sanctuary, it's meant to be the safe place.
Yeah,
So there's there's all of that, and then there's as I mentioned, the self-doubt that creeps in, the lack of trust of yourself,
yeah, that's right.
the lack of respect that you have for yourself. You don't have a good relationship for self, and so then that ends up getting portrayed in different areas of your life.
Yep.
And you may find that in your relationship sphere, for instance, things are going really, really well because you're quite aware of that space and quite aware of how you want things to be and how not to behave and all that type of stuff. But it could be playing out in your workplace.
Yeah, you could be going into your workplace and going, "Oh God, oh dear, I don't think I want to kiss ass this much, and I don't think I respect the authority that's in place because they're actually a bit dumb."
Yeah, yeah. Or, whenever I've respected authority in the past, they've always stabbed me in the back, or
Yeah,
hurt me.
hit on me from
So
a great
why
height.
would I come in trusting that? Or, or you'll get given a promotion, you go, like, I don't deserve the promotion. I'm not good enough for that promotion.
Yep,
And you feel totally, as I said, that imposter syndrome comes in. So
yep,
it can play out in all these different areas of your life. And that to me is why the personal growth is so important, because when you start to heal those wounds, and start to recognize the pain and let go of the suffering, it's not just going to help you in your relationship
mm,
and within, one area of your life. It's actually going to help you across all areas of your life because you're working on you.
yeah, exactly, and that's the greatest investment that you'll ever make, and it's something that you come into this world alone, you will leave this world alone, regardless of who's with you at the time. And the only person really that you need to work on is yourself. That's the only thing you can control anyway.
Exactly.
It was interesting. My husband Joe and I initially, when we first got together, I think I may have mentioned this before, when he was having meltdowns, and I sort of said, "Look, I really do think that you may have autism, and I think you need to go and get a diagnosis." He did not want to go and do it. He felt that I was telling him to do it for me. But what I said to him was, when you go and work on yourself, when you do this stuff, when it was psychological growth, personal growth, whatever it is, that is an investment in yourself. And it will
Mm.
always be something that you keep for you. No one can ever take that away from you, regardless of who they are. It can never change. It can never change. So that's how it is. So yeah, that's the best investment that you can make. And if you are unsure of where to start, I think turning inward and looking
Yeah.
at how to improve yourself in whatever way, that's the number one thing to do. And again, the more strong you become within yourself, the more self-esteem you build, the more self-love you have, the less likely you are to have these kinds of guys or these kinds of perpetrators
Situations.
to
Yeah.
you,
Yeah.
because you're too strong. Like, they'll be disgusted. I know that I've met guys that I've looked at and I've gone, "Ugh, you're so gross. Like, I can see straight up what you are." And they look at me and they're like, "Ugh, she's gross. She's too tall. She's too controlling. She's too opinionated. She's too
Yeah.
much." And I'm
Yeah.
like, "Yes, I am. And it is my
And I
special
own it.
magical barrier that keeps dipshits like you away from me."
Definitely own it. And I think that's the thing. You've got to own your strengths. You absolutely have to own it. And there's the element of, striving for being the best version of yourself, not perfectionism, but being the best version of yourself, like excellence, I
Yep.
suppose. And by working on yourself, you'll do that. You'll be, you are allowing the real you to come out and shine out and not be compressed, not to
Yeah,
conform, you know.
that's right.
And that can be a bit frightening at first to have
Yeah.
to look at yourself and kind of go, okay, I'm ready to start working on me.
It's a
And
big scary jump.
there's a
Yeah,
lot to unravel, and there's a lot to unfold, and there's a lot of pain, and there's a lot of hurt,
it's quite
and
daunting.
you know, I've used that analogy before of when you it's almost like it's a dirty glass of water, and every little bit of work that you're doing on
Yeah,
yourself, putting in a bit of clear glass of water, but as you're putting in that little bit of clear water, you're stirring that sediment down the
yeah,
bottom, and so stuff is gonna come up.
yeah, for
Stuff is
sure.
gonna come up, and that's okay. It's you working through the process. So, you want that.
Well, if you don't clear that wound out, that's when infection sets in, unfortunately.
Oh, yeah,
You know,
festers.
painful, painful. And it may not kill you, but it'll just sit in the background, poisoning your whole life. Yeah. And so it has to be sort of dealt with, doesn't it? And I know
Yes.
it's very difficult. It is very difficult to do this stuff. But at the end of the day, when you do get through the process, and I don't know if anyone ever achieves the whole thing in their life. I think that's something that you just
I think it's
always do.
ongoing. Mm.
Yeah, I think so. But whilst it's daunting and terrifying, it's also exhilarating, don't you find? Because
I do, I do.
when you have these awful challenges, and sometimes you think, "Shit, why does this keep happening to me? This is really
Yeah.
hard work. I'm really struggling." Then when you the penny drops and you go, "Oh, yeah, that's right. I got to do this. I got to heal this, or I got to whatever." You turn a corner and everything shifts, and you don't even do anything. It's just that you did the work on yourself.
Yeah, and that initially, 50% of it is that self-awareness. All of a sudden, you're aware of it,
Yeah.
and now because you're aware of it, you can actually do the work on it.
And you don't it
Because
doesn't even bother you anymore.
without awareness, you'll still keep behaving in
That's right.
that
And
way. So the idea
that's what
is
a coach does, isn't it? A coach
yeah,
points out to you and goes, "Okay, there's a blind spot here. Have you ever thought of that?" And sometimes that can be very challenging
mm,
and confronting, and then you go, "Oh, shit, okay, yeah, I get that now." And then when you start working on it, suddenly you just unlock it. I've had that with youth where I've been working with them and their behavior was really poor, and I'm like, "Did you ever think that it comes from this?" And they're like, "Ding," their little brain turns on, and
yeah,
then suddenly they're like, "Okay," and I've seen that. I've seen them their little eagle wings start to pop
yes,
out, and they're
exactly. Go,
yeah,
"Doo-doo,
yeah, yeah,
right."
yeah, and they're like, "Right, I'm gonna do this with my life," and I'm like, "Yes, girl, that's
Yeah,
what you gotta
you do
do."
that. You do that. And it's phenomenal to see when people do have those aha moments that I like to refer to them
I love
as.
it. Yep,
And you see and all you need is 1 degree of change,
yep,
and that'll totally put you on a different path in life. That's all it is, 1
yep.
degree of change.
And it's funny because I think we live in a society now where we see a lot of people, unfortunately, politicians and world leaders and things, and they're trying to control everything, and
Yeah.
control has become a new thing that everyone tries to do. And at the end of the day, none of us actually really have control over anything. It's
Well,
an
the only thing we do
absolute
have control
guarantee.
over is ourselves,
Yeah.
you
We
know,
can't
and
change what's happening in the world.
no.
We can't control another person. You
No,
can't
you
control
can't. You can't control another person's behavior. You can, though, control your own behavior.
that's it.
You can create new behavioral patterns. You can become a better version of yourself. You can excel. You can evolve.
Yep.
And that's where, you know, if you want control, control yourself. And it's
And
not necessarily controlling yourself with going, you're not going to do this. It's allowing yourself to blossom.
that's right. Being compassionate and going,
Mm.
this I'm a work in progress. This is a journey for me always. And when things come
Yeah.
up, and we fail. We fail
Yeah.
because that's we're
Yeah.
human. So it's okay to be kind to yourself and go, okay,
Well, you're
what did I learn
sculpting a
from this?
masterpiece, aren't you? So that's, you know, you're just chiseling away at bits
Slowly
of
but surely.
the stuff so you can actually create your own masterpiece.
Yeah. Yeah. And self-forgiveness and self-compassion, saying, I'm not perfect. I don't want to be perfect. It's okay. I'm doing the best I can. But, and sometimes falling off the horse, but then getting back on.
Yeah, and then you get back on. Exactly right. Yeah, yeah.
Hopefully that
So
is
it's a
yeah,
very it is, as you said, it's a topical,
difficult
conversation
to
for, you
unpack.
know, that
Mm,
subject, and
very emotionally charged. I'm sure
it is very
probably get
emotionally
some people
charged.
upset about some of the things we've said because I know that there's many, many layers and it's extremely
Oh,
complex, domestic violence.
exactly. I mean, I must admit, I was a bit hesitant in even talking about this subject
Yeah.
because I know how much those wounds can dig deep, you know,
Yeah.
and what they can do. And then I've still got stuff that I'm working on as well.
Yeah.
And, you know, even thinking like going away and thinking when we were discussing that we were going to have a chat about this and going away and having a think about it myself and kind of going, oh, okay, how do I really feel about divulging
Mm.
it?
Yeah,
And it wasn't until I spoke to my husband where he kind of went, you know, what you've gone through and the work that you've done on yourself
Yeah.
may perhaps bring some insight to other people that there
That's
is
what I hope.
a channel.
That's what I hope. I hope that someone who may be watching this maybe would think, okay, I'm in a domestic violence relationship, I need to change, or someone who's come out and is really going through, because let's be honest, when you leave, it's really hard.
It's hard.
Going
Yeah.
through that awful stage, I hope this lifts them up in some way and encourages or empowers them.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. So on that note, guys, if anything that we've said here today has actually hit home on some level, or you've had some insights, please feel free to comment below or join our Facebook community page, which is the Art of Beautiful Thinking podcast community page. Just do a search for us on Facebook. We do have some free tools and resources on our website as well that can possibly help you with that first point of personal growth and where to even start. But by the way, if you really like our stuff, subscribe. We would love to continue building the community
Yeah.
and,
Love it.
sparking that light in as many people as we possibly can.
Mhm. Yes.
So until next time,
Bye.
bye. We'd like to say a huge thank you to our incredible audience for your continued support. Our mission is to ignite your spark, empowering you to be a beacon of light for others. We'd love to hear from you. So if you've got any questions that you would like answered in future episodes or just want to share some insights, connect with us on our Facebook community page. If you're looking for additional resources, go to our website. You'll find the link below. And remember, the absolute best way to help us grow is to share this episode with your friends and family and to subscribe to the Art of Beautiful Thinking podcast. So until next time, think beautifully and live brilliantly.